Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to look at creating certain UI user interface elements such as a health bar and a stamina meter. So let's get right into it. There are a couple aspects to this, such as changing the color of the meter based on remaining health. So say you're sitting at 50% health, the meter turns yellow. If you're at, say, 20% health, the meter turns red. So we're going to be looking at changing color based on remaining value, and we'll also look at changing size. So it's important to realize that size is basically going to be a percent. So it's not so much that the meter is 1 pixel per health point or anything like that. It's a percent of remaining health. So that means you're going to need to have a variable for your current health and a variable for your max health. That way you calculate a fraction, and that fraction is applied to the scale of the object. In other words, if you're at 50% health, then the object should only be 50% length. If you're 20% health, it should only be 20% length, that kind of thing. So let's get right into it. So this is what you should see when you create a new environment, approximately this. I think I might have rotated the camera a little bit. Go up to Game Object, go to UI, and go to Image. Now you're going to see something like this, so you're not really getting a good look at the canvas. So go ahead, double click on the canvas, and then just kind of rotate around. And you want to make sure that you're not looking at the canvas from the wrong angle. So what you're going to do is right now you're seeing this in the lower left corner. You want to run it to make sure it's actually in the lower left corner. It is. If it showed up in the lower right corner, then that means you're actually looking at this canvas from the other side. So let's start with this image. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to change the anchor. We need the anchor to be on the left. So if you click over here, you'll see, so you've got the image selected, and you'll see the various components. Over here, you're going to click on this, and you're going to choose middle left. Okay? That is what you want the anchor for this to be. The reason for that is when we scale, typically you're looking at a health bar scaling from the right to the left. If you don't have the anchor to the left and you have the anchor in the middle, what would happen is this thing would actually scale inwards, and we don't want that. So, now that we've done that, let's change its size. Let's make it like a 200 width, and we want it to say be only like 40 height. All right, something like that looks good. Let's move this down. So there it is in the lower left corner. We can move it in a little bit. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to have a GM object, and there's nothing magical about a GM object. It's just a regular game object that you use to control functionality that is like game flow in general, rather than functionality that is associated with one object or another. This is just kind of a collection of functionality that really doesn't necessarily associate with any one object, that you kind of, again, you're doing the game flow. So let's go up to Game Object, Create Empty, and call it GM. And again, calling it GM doesn't mean anything other than to identify it to you, the designer, as a manager object, because this is just a regular object. So let's go ahead and create a script. So create C#, and we'll call this Game Flow. Click on the GM object. Put Game Flow on it. And let's open it up. Okay, and there's the script. So first thing we have to do is we got to create our variables for health. So public, static, and it's going to be a float. So that's the type. And again, it has to be static. That way the variable is available anywhere in the application to any object, since there's so many different objects that might be changing your HP. So public static float current HP, and we'll say it's currently 500. Public static float max HP. And again, it's very important to realize that you're tracking both, not just what your max is, but your current is. Okay, so we have our two variables. Now we need the GM object to be aware of this image object. So public transform, and it will be, let's call it health meter. We'll save it. For this image, we'll call it health image. So let's click on our GM object that the script is attached to, and there you are, health meter. We'll take that image and drag and drop it. So now the GM object, via the script, is aware of the health image and can now make changes to it, such as color. So if you click on health image, see how it has this image script and this color? Well, what we can do is we can make UI changes. So up here, let's do using Unity Engine, just like the top line, but then we do .ui, and that makes certain additional commands available to us. So the start section, as you can see, use this for initialization. We'll get rid of that because we know that. So this gets done when the object gets initiated. Or initialized, I should say. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to change the color of the health meter. So health meter dot get component. Which component? Well, we said it's that image component, specifically color. And it's going to be set to a new color. So this is RGB expressed as a percent, although the percent is 0 to 1. So we don't want any red, we want 100% green, and we don't want any blue. And this is part of the reason why we start off with a white image. That way we can change it to whatever color we want. So let's go ahead and run that. We just changed it to a green health meter. So by changing these variables, okay, or should I say changing the colors, we can change what it looks like. And we're going to do that based on value as it's running. So we don't do it here. Well, we set the color originally to green, but as far as when we're checking on a frame-by-frame basis, we do that in the update section. As you can see, update runs once per frame, so now we can get rid of that. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to do two things. One, we need to change the color, but we also need to change the size. Let's do one at a time. Let's just do color. So say current HP is 300. I'm going to take this, but we're going to put it into an if statement. In other words, rather than just changing color, we want to check something first. So if current HP is less than, say, we'll say 301, since we chose 300, then we want something to happen. Well, we already have a template for that. We have this. We're going to change the color, but we want it to be yellow. So if I recall correctly, yellow is red and green. But now, whereas this happens unconditionally, this only happens as the game is running if current HP drops below 301. Well, it does because we started off at 301. Now, obviously, in your game, this would get reduced based on, say, they've been hit, whatever. You wouldn't just change it like this. This is just to show you how the functionality works. There you go, yellow. Well, what about red then if the HP drops even further? So let's set this to 200. Copy this. Paste it. If it's less than 201, then it's just red. And there you go. So that's half of it. That is the changing of the color based on value. Now you want a value of current HP. Now you want to change the size based on current HP. Well, that isn't conditional. You're just going to keep applying that. So what you're going to do for that is it'll still be health meter, and it'll still be get component. But for that, it'll be RECT transform, which is where we changed the control point at first. So over here, we centered this to the left and we changed the scale. This is what we're going to change now. Well, specifically, we want to change the local scale. So oops, sorry, it's rect transform. I added an extra sign in there. Okay, so local scale equals new vector 3, and it is going to be a fraction. So let's see if we can avoid having to create another variable and just put the calculation right in here. So it would be current HP divided by max HP because it's a fraction. This will always come out to less than 1 unless they're equal, then it's 1, which means that as a fraction, this will be scaled down to size. And there's max HP. And we need a, whoops, we didn't want that parenthesis there. So current HP divided by max HP is the X scale. The Y scale is 1, Z scale is 1. Now we'll see if it likes or dislikes that calculation. Didn't give us an error. And current HP is set at 200, so this should be at about 2/5 of the width, or length rather. And sure enough it is. See how it got a lot smaller? So let's go back up to 300. Both greater in size and change in color. And we'll put this up at 500. And there you go. So it's just a matter of this variable being changed when damage is taken, whether it be fall damage, damage over time, combat damage, whatever. Whenever damage is taken, this variable is changed, and then this on every single frame will check to see what it should be. All right, so that is a health meter. So how about a stamina meter, something that changes based on usage, like say your character is running, like in like Friday the 13th or something like that where you have stamina. So let's take this health image, we'll copy it, we'll paste it, and we'll change the name to stamina image. Take that and we'll move it up. Now just to be clear, the order here does not have to do with the vertical order here. What this order is in reference to is which object is actually on top of the other object. And it's actually the opposite of what you would think. Looking at this, you'd say, okay, health image is overlaying stamina image. Whatever reason, Unity just does just the opposite. This is actually the top image. So I'll show you. So say we put this overlapping the other, you'll see that this is covering that. See? So the listing of here is whatever's at the bottom is actually on top of everything else if they're overlapping. If they're not overlapping like this, then it doesn't matter. But if images are overlapping, whatever's on the bottom is actually on top of everything else. Whatever. One of those odd things that Unity does. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to have the GM object be aware of this new image. So we'll go back into our script and we'll have public transform stamina meter. And we'll need stamina variables as well. So public static float current stam, and we'll say we'll use 200. Public static float max stam equals 200. Okay, so now we save that. The new variable will appear. So there's stamina meter. So we take the stamina image and put it onto the stamina meter, and now the GM object can make changes to the stamina meter. Well, right now there's nothing here to do that. We could take a similar approach, but stamina meters tend to be like one color, like I think in Friday the 13th, they're red until they run out. They don't really change colors. Thinking also stamina meters in games like Dark Souls, I don't think the meter really changes color, so we won't have it go through this as far as color change, but we will have it go through this. So we'll do the same thing, and that is we'll copy this, we'll paste it, but then we just change this to stamina meter. Oops. Get component, rect transform, local scale, but then this has to be current stam, I believe is the variable I used, and max stam. So I'm not copying and pasting to confuse you or because I'm lazy. Well, I'm a little lazy, but it's to really impress upon you that you're not creating new functionality. You're taking something you already did and you're just applying it to another meter. All right, so let's run this. We'll actually do one more thing. Let's give it a blue color to begin with. So stamina meter, and we'll make it blue. There we go. So what I will do is I'll do one more thing, because we've seen how if the HP meter changes, the color and the size will change, but I kind of want to see something more in real time, and it's really difficult to do with an HP meter. But with the stamina meter, generally speaking, if your character is running, you're using stamina. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check for a single key press. If the W key is being held down, because W is usually used for forward, then the stamina meter will decrease. If the W key is let go, then the stamina meter will increase. So let's add a key press variable. It's specifically a key code variable. So again, in our script on the GM object, so public key code, and we'll just call this run forward. Doesn't really matter. And when you do a key code, what happens is when you go to that object, this selector appears and you have to say what key you want. Like I said, typically if you're moving forward, if you're using WASD controls, forward would be W. So far, so good. So in the update section, we have to check for that W being pressed. So if, and pressing a key is input, so if input dot get key, so if the key is continually being pressed, and we said it's the run forward key, So if that is being pressed, we want something to happen. What we want is that for every period of time, we want your stamina to be decreased. You don't want to, since this is done every frame, you don't want to base it on frame rate because the faster your computer is running, the quicker you'd run out of stamina. So you have to put in a timer in here. And there's a bunch of ways to do it, but we'll just do a quick little variable. So public float, and we'll say time check, and it's equal to 0. So if the key is being pressed, run forward, okay, what we want is we want that new time check variable is going to be increased, so plus equals time.delta time. Without going into a big explanation, what this means is how much time has passed since the last time this has been checked. So this is going to be increased by the change in time. If you remember math, that's what delta refers to. Delta is the change in, so the change in time. So this is going to be increased by that. So that means that we then need to check this value. So if time check is greater than, say, 0.5, so half a second has passed, then we want to reset. Oops, sorry, I forgot the other parenthesis. I knew I did something wrong because these weren't aligning up. So if time check exceeds half a second, then we set time check back to 0. That way, this will only execute once every time this hits half a second. That way it has to increase by half a second again. So time check will be set back to 0, and then current stam minus equals 1. So it will be decreased by 1. Actually, let's make it decrease by 5 because we want to be able to see the meter changing fairly quickly. Okay, so quick recap. We created a new variable. If you're holding down the W key, this variable is being increased by how much time has passed. When that total time has equal half a second, set that back down to 0 because we only want it to happen once per half a second, and then decrease stamina. Since stamina is decreased, then the scale of this object should change. And if I didn't forget anything, that should do it. Okay, no errors. Nothing's happening yet, and I'm going to press W. See? Stamina is decreasing. Although it is decreasing inward, so it looks like that did not do what I wanted to do. I thought that was changing it. So the pivot. Okay, all I actually had to do to fix this was when you click on this, if you notice this is shift also set pivot. So I also set the pivot, click here. And now it runs just fine. So sorry about that brief scare. I thought I misunderstood something. And that's it. So now what you're going to do is you can check to see if the button isn't being held, then that should increase. So in the update section, and since we already have a check to see if this button is being held down, you can just append this with an else. So you'd say, okay, if that button isn't being held down, then we want something to happen. And what you could do is, again, you really don't want to base this on frame rate. You want to create a new variable, but I don't want to drag this out. So you'd want to create a new time check variable, maybe call it regen time check, have it get increased over a certain period of time. But for now, we'll just show you this getting increased by a fraction. So So if the button is not being held down, then we want something to happen. We want current stam to be increased by, say, 0.1. So again, you wouldn't want to do it quite this way because this is doing it based on frame rate, because that means every single frame it's being increased. You'd actually want to create a, like I said, a second time check variable, have it get increased, and only do it every time it hits a certain threshold. But like I said, I don't want to drag this out. But before you do this, you'd also want to make sure that you have not exceeded max stamina. And so finally, the max variable has come into play now. So if max stam, oops, sorry. So if current stam is less than max stam, then you increase the current stam, which just makes sense. It just makes sense because you should not be increasing the current stamina if it's exceeding the maximum stamina. So again, if the key is being held down, this time check is being increased. If it's not being held down, all right, then what happens is there's a check to see if your current stamina is less than your maximum stamina. If it is, then go ahead and increase your current stamina. And it's probably going to increase it really fast. Oops, what's happening? So 4133, that's weird. Current stam plus equal, oh, sorry. When it's a float, if you're changing it by a decimal, you have to drop in that F. So it'd be easy enough for me to go back and edit this out, but it's a teachable moment. And so you see what happens, that even though you declared that it's a float, when you actually make a change by a decimal, you gotta drop in that F. So sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to hold down W. The number's going down. I'm going to let go of W, and the number regenerates. And it should not exceed the max. And it did not. So there you go. And I think that should do it for this tutorial. This shows you how to have basic health and stamina, and how to actually go so far as to regen the stamina. I didn't do that with the health bar because, like I said, that is really much more complex as far as, are you in a turn-based RPG? Is it a real-time environment? Is there fall damage? There's all kinds of things that can affect that. So I just really, in that case, I just wanted to show you how to attach a variable, or really have a variable be expressed as a graphic, whereas this one is easy enough to show. If activity isn't happening, then it's being decreased. If activity is being done, then it's being decreased. So that should about do it.